on my attention. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 of 200. We're here for another podcast while on hiatus. I'm joined by my co-host Mark Rickaby. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm getting there, Kyle. How are you doing?
I'm there, I guess, enough to facilitate and organize a podcast episode. We're also joined by a special guest. I'm going to call you a friend of the podcast, Paris Marx. How are you doing?
Love it. Love being a friend of the show, and happy to be back. I feel like last time we recorded, I was in South Korea, so we were like closer on the time zone scale. This time I'm in Montreal, so quite a distance.
Yeah, how's it all going over there?
Not great. I know you guys are dealing with this like basically far right coalition government. We haven't reached that stage yet, but in Canada, it looks like we're very much headed in that direction. People might know Justin Trudeau is our prime minister. He's with the centrist Liberal Party. He's been in power now for 8 or 9 years, so it's been quite a while. His party is way down in the polls. About 20 points behind the Conservative Party at the moment. The Conservatives, looks like they're going to win the next election, which is poised to happen sometime next year. And yeah, the leader of the party is kind of, probably one of the most right-wing leaders of the Conservative Party that we've ever seen. So when we have our election next year, it won't be like where you have, this coalition of, sure, you have your national party, but then you have like your more kind of extreme populist, like, ACT in New Zealand First. For us, it will just be the Conservative Party. They'll probably get a majority government so they can do whatever they want. And right now they're being led by like the most extreme faction of that party that pulled in people from the more like extreme right party that we had a few years ago that has kind of died off because these people have taken over the actual Conservative Party. Yeah.
Oh,
So it's grim. It's grim.
Sounds good. It's really
Yeah.
interesting, because we've had this right-wing government come in here. You've got that feeling that it's going to happen in Canada. Who knows? Could turn around. But even in a place like the UK, Labour government got in, and they're as right-wing as our current right-wing government in New Zealand in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they're like conservative light, right? Like
At best.
yeah. Yeah.
Is there
It's
much
so disappointing.
sense that the Liberal Party under Trudeau is kind of heading in that direction as well? Are they trying to couch in the same way that Harris and the Democrats in the US are picking up some of the more extreme right-wing talking points?
Surprisingly, no. I would say. Well, yes and no. I think it's fair to say, right? Because there are several different like influences kind of pulling at the Liberal Party at the moment. So the way it has been framed through Trudeau's tenure is that he took the Liberal Party more to the left. Which I guess is something you can do. I would still say it's quite a neoliberal party, right? And kind of the narrative right now in the kind of Ottawa bubble. Ottawa, of course, is our capital, not Toronto, for people who aren't 100% certain of that. If you go up to the top of like Mount Victoria to the lookout and you see all the little arrows pointing to the Commonwealth capitals, Ottawa is on there, not Toronto, right? So yeah. So in the bubble, everyone's talking about how, the Liberal Party needs to go more to the right to pull back,
Right.
undecided centrist voters and all this kind of stuff, which I think is total bullshit. But you know how, the thinking
Yeah.
works in these sort of places. And so what we have seen from the Liberal Party is actually they're expanding the social safety net in a way that we haven't seen in a very long time in Canada, which is very positive. They have rolled out coverage for dental care. Right now it's for seniors and certain low income people, and that is like slowly expanding. And so people who, have not been able to afford to get their teeth taken care of in a long time have been able to do that. There was a report out yesterday that over 1 million people have now taken advantage of this program. And over the next year or so, it's supposed to expand to about 6 million more people, or 6 million people total or something. Like, this is a huge difference, right? They're also slowly kind of rolling out a pharmacare program. Canada is the only major country that has universal healthcare that does not have universal pharmaceutical coverage. We don't have like a Pharmac equivalent up here. So they're like slowly rolling that out, and they're starting with birth control drugs and diabetes drugs because they can be quite expensive. And, I guess there's a good political constituency in there to cover those ones. So again, it's a positive expansion of the welfare state and you know, of the social safety net that people can rely on. And of course, as we've had all these concerns about cost of living for the past little while, this is one of their pitches to say, look, we, you know, are listening. We are trying to, you know, make things, you know, less expensive in your lives. And then, of course, I would say the other key program there is the public daycare program that has been rolling out over the past few years, where more and more families now have access to daycare that's $10 a day. So it's much more affordable than
$10.
yeah, than what was previously available. And so there's an issue now where there's not enough spaces for the demand, of course, because everyone wants to be into the public daycare. Um, but you know, it has been making a very big difference for a lot of people, and there, you know, are initiatives in place. There's money being rolled out to expand that over time in the different provinces, and of course, you know, Canada is a federal country, so it's the provinces that actually administer those programs, and the federal government helps to fund it. So you know, it works a bit differently in the different provinces. Some provinces are at $10 a day. Other ones are, I think, still at 15, but are moving down to $10 like next year, I think. So there have been those like benefits, right? And it's very clear that part of the reason that this was done is because the Liberals have a minority government, and so they have been relying on the New Democratic Party, which is a more center-left party in Canada, but you know, has become more centrist over time. You know,
Funny how
they've
that
relied
happens.
on yeah, yeah, exactly, right. They've been relying on them for support, and so in exchange for their support, they have been doing these sort of things. There's also been positive moves on like labor legislation to make sure that employers can't bring in scab workers if there's a strike. You know, sort of things like that that the left in Canada have been demanding for a long time, but you know, there has never been the political, you know, kind of situation for something like that to come in. So there have been those positive changes. However, there has been more talk about, you know, balancing the budget and austerity. I would say the Trudeau government is not really interested in that. The finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, talks about it from time to time, but I think it's pretty clear that she would like to do more kind of reining in spending. And I think Trudeau and his people are kind of not letting her do that, which I would say is a positive thing, because we're getting all these social programs and things as a result. You know, the Liberals early in their tenure also brought in a child benefit that has significantly reduced child poverty in Canada, which is something they don't talk nearly about and probably should. I know I've been going on for a little bit, so
No,
I'll
keep
just say
going, keep
the
going.
other okay the other piece of this though is that in trying to appeal to this increasing support for the Conservatives and to try to, you know, kind of throw a bone to this more kind of, you know, amount of people who are supporting the right wing in the country, they have been making moves on immigration that are more concerning. And so, you know, I don't know if your listeners would know, but Canada obviously accepts a lot of immigrants. The Canadian population has been soaring over the past few years because of the record numbers of people that we have been bringing into the country. A few years ago, the Canadian population was like 39 million. It's now over 40 million, and I think close to 41. So you know, it's been increasing quite rapidly. And so they have announced over time restrictions on the number of international students that will be allowed into the country, because there has been, yeah, I think that there are some legitimate issues there, because I think that a number of universities and colleges were bringing in students just to charge them really high
Yeah.
tuition fees and not actually providing a good education for them. So I think there's a certain degree of that needing to be reined in, but it did play into this narrative that like, oh, international students are part of the problem for why our housing is so expensive and blah, blah, blah. But they have also moved quite recently in the past couple of weeks to also reduce the amount of, I think it's permanent residents that they will be allowing in future years, such that Statistics Canada actually predicts that this will mean that the total population of Canada will actually decline in the next 2 years, which I think is going to have big economic impacts and will also play into this increasing kind of racism and anti-immigrant sentiment that is taking hold in Canada, which traditionally we haven't seen, because you know, Canada has such a large percentage of immigrants or second generation immigrants, you know, in the country, that even the Conservative Party couldn't really do that. And what you really see from the conservatives is not so much saying that like immigration is bad, but trying to say, oh, most of the immigrants are refugees and refugees are bad, which is not true. But you know, trying to make it so that the public overestimates the number of immigrants who are refugees rather than economic immigrants, and saying that, you know, refugees are the problem and all this kind of stuff. So I would say that is like the main place where we have seen this kind of right-wing shift really happening. And just to close off, I would say my biggest concern as we're seeing, you know, this kind of pressure on Trudeau. So what we've been seeing recently is a pressure within the Liberal Party, and the media has been doing this for a long time, trying to pressure Trudeau to step down and for someone else to take over his place. And especially after Kamala Harris replaced Joe Biden in the United States, and there was a very brief bump in kind of polling support there. A lot of the discussion was like, oh, Trudeau should go. We need to get rid of him. And then the Liberal Party can rejuvenate itself and beat the Conservatives. I don't think the actual kind of array of factors there is the same. And so my biggest concern is that if Trudeau is forced out, and if the Liberals lose the next election, we will not only see a lot of these more progressive things that his government has brought in be rolled back, but the whole narrative will become like, oh, we need to do austerity. We need to go in this right-wing direction. We need to give in to these anti-immigrant you know, sentiments that are growing there. Some of the, again, because Canada is a federal country, some of the provinces now that have right-wing governments are really trying to play into the anti-trans stuff as well. We saw Alberta in particular introduce a ton of legislation just yesterday that's aimed at really restricting the rights of trans people. And that's growing as a key kind of cause that conservatives around the country are embracing. So I think that, you know, again, to compare it to what you're experiencing down there, I think that we're like poised. We're already seeing this on the provincial level with some of these really right-wing governments that have been taking power over the past few years. But I think on the federal level, we're poised to be moving much more in a direction that you have moved in over the past couple of years, which I think is really dangerous and scary. Sorry that took so long for me to explain, but
Good to have the context. And I think anyone um, who is listening to this podcast here in New Zealand will have heard a lot of echoes there of what's been occurring within politics, but within left politics as well, and that desire within parties of the liberal centre, of the centre left, to fracture as austerity dangles itself in front of them. And you're saying, you know, Krista Friedland was kind of pushing for more austere politics, and the leadership was doing the opposite. We had the other split. We had a bunch of people within the Labour Party as we were coming up to the election last year who were saying we should do better taxing, and the leadership were like, go away. You know, we're not going to do this. Where they didn't just, maybe to their credit, they didn't pick up the right-wing culture war stuff as much, but
yeah.
they tried to move the dial by doing the austerity stuff, by burning a whole bunch of progressive economic policy. And it just doesn't fucking work.
Yeah,
You know,
I would
like,
say we do have a capital gains tax in Canada,
yeah,
and
amazing.
the liberals have been raising it, and that has also pissed off a lot of business people. And yeah, I know you wanted to talk about tech as well, but like the tech community in particular, like lost its mind when the Liberal government started proposing higher capital gains rates. Like the higher up people at Shopify in particular, which is based in Canada, were like tweeting about how angry they were about it and how it was going to like drive away tech investment. And it's like,
Why?
dudes, like it's a very small increase in the amount of taxes you
Right.
multimillionaires, if not billionaires, are going to have to pay. Like
Yeah.
people are not, you know, sympathizing with you over this.
No. But they are here in New Zealand. It was pretty wild to see. So like if you've got some guys in the party you can talk to, Paris, tell them that it doesn't work and to look at New
Yeah.
Zealand.
I wish
Uh,
they would listen to me. Yeah. I don't think that's gonna
look at what
happen.
this idiot did. They
Yeah.
fucking lost. And now they've got the most right-wing government in generation.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like whatever happens after the next election in Canada, which is going to happen next year at some time, but because we have a minority parliament where, you know, there's no party with a majority, we don't know exactly when they're going to pull the trigger on it.
yeah.
It's assumed that it will probably be in the fall, but it has to be by or in your fall, in our spring. but it has, so it's assumed it'll probably be like around Mayish maybe. But it has to happen by October. That's like
Yeah.
the cutoff, because we have our elections every 4 years. Whatever happens after that election, I think the Liberals are going to have a new leader. The New Democratic Party, whose leader right now is Jagmeet Singh, who's the first Sikh leader of a political party in Canada. He will inevitably be replaced because he hasn't seen a significant increase in like the share of the vote or the number of seats that the party is winning under his leadership. And I think a lot of people already kind of want him gone, but
Hmm.
don't want to do that when there's an election that could be coming soon. And obviously the Conservatives are going to, be powerful regardless of what happens. I think the like hope on the left is that maybe you can have just enough seats to like keep them out of power, but that probably isn't going to happen. So at least keep them to a minority so they can't do whatever they want. And of course, we have your old voting system, first past the post, which is really terrible at those sorts of things. And so whatever happens after the next election, there's going to be a turnover in the Liberal Party and in the New Democratic Party. In the Liberal Party, I think inevitably that's going to mean the party is going to go more to the right. The hope is that in the New Democratic Party, which has become more centrist, that we'll be able to get like more of a left-wing leader in there.
Yeah.
But I'm still a bit skeptical party leadership will allow that to happen. And so like, my kind of naive hope is like, hopefully Trudeau can just barely pull it off and like keep enough seats that the Conservatives won't, win the next election. And then regardless of what happens, you're still going to have that rejuvenation at the top. Unfortunately, it will be a more right-wing Liberal Party, but still, the Conservatives won't be in there, so that will be good enough. But yeah, I think I'm very skeptical that that will actually happen, and I think that the Conservatives are almost certain to win it, and then we're going to head in a pretty dark direction for 4 years, or
I
maybe
know.
8, or maybe more than that. Who knows? Yeah,
Whoa.
yeah.
I know that we've had a discussion here quite a bit, but I'm wondering if it's something that is floated in Canada at all, which is the centre-left governments dipping into economic populism more, as they're kind of out against conservatives. Because we were saying, no, just bribe the electorate. Just like who cares? If you really want to win, if you're, and especially, with the specter of the US election next week, and the rhetoric around, okay, like Trump is a fascist, like this is saving democracy kind of stuff. Okay, just give everyone $2,000, or or whatever. That's obviously a simplification, but left-wing center parties of the West just either don't seem to understand or are just completely unwilling to guard that flank, even from the far right, who are out there like doing, you can't say progressive, but policies that would put a lot more food on the table for some of the most disadvantaged families.
I think it's interesting, right? So you would kind of expect the New Democratic Party here, which is a smaller party, polls around maybe 15-20%, to be doing that, and they're not, right? Because they're under a more centrist leader at the moment, and they are not really doing populist stuff. I can't remember his slogan, but like it's really terrible. It's like we're doing things for people or something like that. It's like, what are you talking about, man? Like it's so
Great.
bad. Yeah, okay, great. Fighting for people. It's like, you need to like, yeah, it's they have terrible comms at the moment. Let's put it that way. And also not great, policies, right? Even the dental care, like I could criticize some of these programs that are being rolled out. It's not, but it's not done in a way where it's like the traditional kind of public healthcare that we have. It's like through a private,
Right.
insurance company that is handling the distribution of the insurance, blah blah blah, like all that kind of, like it's not great, but at least it's happening, right? I would say on the liberal side of things, obviously it's a party that you don't really expect to go very populist, because it is more of a centrist party. And, obviously in New Zealand, you have the National Party and the Labour Party. I often point to the UK, where after World War II, you kind of had the replacement of the traditional Liberal Party by the Labour Party, which was a more left-wing party that had more roots in labor, right? Canada has something like that in the sense that you have the Conservative Party, you have the Liberal Party, and you always have more of a left party. Originally with the the CCF. I can't remember exactly what that stood for off the top of my head, which morphed into the New Democratic Party, the NDP. But you never had that situation where they kind of became the second or main party and displaced the Liberal Party. So we've always had this kind of right wing and centrist kind of interplay and back and forth for federal government, at least. But the thing is that like this Liberal Party has been doing things that you haven't really expected from a Liberal Party for a long time, in rolling out dental care, in rolling out a limited pharmacare that they say they're going to expand, in rolling out daycare, in rolling out the child benefit that has really helped reduce child poverty. Like there have been a number of positive steps, even if there have been neoliberal things that I really disagree with as well, right? And even if the construction of those programs are not ideal, I think they've done a really bad job at selling that to the public. And part of that is because a lot of the anger right now is not just focused at Trudeau personally, but is also focused at the carbon tax that they have brought in. That where, and again, like it speaks to how poorly they have been able to sell their policies. Like I don't necessarily agree that a carbon tax is the best way to address the climate crisis. I think that they should be doing many other things that are not so like market oriented. But the way that they have designed this tax is that, you know, you put the price on carbon, but the vast majority of the revenue is actually given back to taxpayers in a rebate that they receive 4 times a year. And so the vast majority of actual people are getting more money back in the rebate, especially like lower income and middle class people, than they would actually be paying in the carbon tax. But the Conservatives have really been able to seize on it and say you're paying so much more because you're paying this carbon tax. And like the fact that everyone gets a rebate and that most people end up better off is like not even part of the discussion. And the weird thing is that the only people in the country who don't get the rebate are people in Quebec, because Quebec has a cap and trade system instead of the carbon tax. And in Quebec, there's no problem with these policies at all, and like no anger that we don't get the rebate. But in like much of the rest of the country, people are totally pissed off at the carbon tax, even though they get the rebate. Like it's so interesting, like how the politics of it plays out, and how like there's not a lot of sense in it all. But I would say, you know, to get to the core of your question, no, they're not doing a populist move, but they have been doing these policies that actually a lot of people support other than the carbon tax, but they've really failed to sell it to people. And unfortunately, Trudeau has become like the figure of a lot of people's anger, even if that anger isn't always justified, or people can't point to something specific that they're angry about. You know, he when it comes to like the vaccine people, they hate him because, you know, he's associated with the COVID response.
The
But
vaccine
also,
people.
exactly. But you know the people I'm talking about. You know, where our occupation of Ottawa inspired your people down there in Wellington to go for it, right? But also because you know, as cost of living has increased, as housing has gotten more expensive, he has been kind of the lightning rod for a lot of that anger. And also, as you know, there's been this growing more far right constituency in Canada that is represented by some provincial governments at the moment, and also I would say the leadership of the Conservative Party as it's currently constituted, that you have seen a lot of that anger directed at him. And I think it's just really hard for the Liberals to get past that specifically.
Further to that, is there a sense or like observations and kind of things happening that people have commented on around a bit more of a corporate sort of funded response to that? Like are the lobbyists influencing the Conservative Party and the media on this? Is there a kind of agenda, I guess, like we saw certainly with this shift to the right-wing government occurring, you know, around the election, and kind of prefigured a lot with the sort of shift in tone of media coverage and everything, that there was a huge amount of money flowing into electoral finances from lots of like high-level corporate and small business kind of cooked up people, but also like a lot of really hardcore multinational lobbying and backed by like the think tanks. And now we're seeing the government basically putting into place. Education is probably the big place where this is happening. It's very obvious, but there are a bunch of other things around resource consenting and that kind of thing, where corporates are basically writing the policy. I'm just wondering if there's a sense that the think tanks are, and those people are getting involved as well in Canada.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case, right? And it plays out in some different ways. So obviously in Canada, we have a bit of a different election financing system than you have in New Zealand. So there's a limitation on the amount that individuals and corporations can donate to political parties, where it's a maximum, I think, of like 6,000 and something dollars a year. I could be wrong on the figure. Maybe it's actually a lot lower than that. I haven't looked at it in quite a while. And so there's that limitation, and so there's public funding for the parties as well, because there are limits on the amount that they can spend. But pre-election, there is also ways for I would say funders to get around that in funding kind of ads and things like that before the writ actually drops and the election period actually starts, right? Um, I would say that there has definitely been a corporate response to the liberals and kind of them getting fed up with the liberals and certainly supporting the conservatives under Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of that party. Um, it's interesting because the conservatives have been trying to present themselves, and I'm sure you saw a bit of this in New Zealand as well. I think we're seeing it in a lot of these more extreme right-wing parties where they're trying to present them more as like the champions of the working class and all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff, and not kowtowing to corporate interests and whatnot. There was a story earlier this year, last year, that Pierre Poilievre, the conservative leader, came out and basically said, like, if lobbyists want me to listen to them, they need to get Canadians on side with them, and they need to be like running ads and making their case to Canadians for why they should believe in them. And then you see like the records of his meetings and see that he's still meeting with like a ton of lobbyists, right? It's all like kind of public PR and just the kind of stuff that he says to make it seem like he's this man of the people, right? But I think you've also seen a lot of anger from the corporate community, whether it is around, capital gains changes and some tax changes that the liberals have brought in that, corporate Canada doesn't want to see happen. I would say there's also a bit of anger about these changes to immigration and the reduction in the amount of immigrants that were going to come in and restrictions on their ability to bring in foreign workers for low pay that is starting to be implemented right now. But I think that the biggest corporate constituency that's angry with the liberals is, of course, the oil field and the oil companies, which are mainly centered in Alberta. Um, and of course, there have been regulations being brought in over the past number of years. They've been long delayed, but they're slowly starting to roll out where later this year or very soon, they're supposed to finally be rolling out a cap on emissions from the oil sands in Alberta. And the oil companies are absolutely livid about that. So yeah, you definitely see it. I don't know if it's as like outward or as obvious as you saw in New Zealand around the election and what was happening there, but yeah, corporations and corporate Canada is definitely very fed up with the liberals at this point, and see that they have this really like extreme leader of the Conservative Party who has also become very popular by seizing on like the public anger
Yeah.
that is out there and misleading people about his policies and what he's doing. And they see a real opportunity to like totally shake up this country in their favor in the next few years, and they're ready to seize it. Yeah.
How does the narrative work around that? Because this has been one of the big struggles, I guess, from our point of view, with the way that media present our Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, as, I guess, trying to do similarly, but he's just so bad at it that he's stayed at -20 likability or trust or whatever for 3 or 4 years. Like people really don't like him, but the media just ignores it. And I think we're still getting stories every now and then that say, "Oh, you just have to get to know him." Like they're really going out of their way to present National as a party of workers or whatever, or of change at worst, but in the face of just the most venal, like malicious politicians. And everyone can, if you're watching what's happening, you can say, okay, yeah, these folks are pretty bad. But things that would have stuck and ruined a career even 5 years ago just no longer seem to be in play at all at this point. Has that, I mean, post-Trump and et cetera, that's been happening across the board, I think, as it's considered, I just guess, not worth talking about, or like the strategy or the ideology of both sides and objectivity and media has just been completely hacked So he's going, oh yeah, he's a Nazi. But look at those other guys. Is the way it generally seems to play out a lot of the time. Is that happening at all in Canada? With the conservative leader, like, he's got a really checkered past, right? Like, he's not a good guy.
Oh yeah, he's always been like on the right wing of the Conservative Party, right? He is a guy who never really had a proper job, who was elected to Parliament very young and has been there ever since. So when he tries to act like an anti-establishment kind of guy, it's a bit weird because he's been there forever. Basically, he's not very old either. I think he's like in his 40s, mid late 40s, something like that. Trudeau is just in his 50s now. He was in his 40s when he was elected as well. It's a bit of a mystery how this is the guy who has been able to command this like significant rise in conservative support, because he's not traditionally like a likable dude. He has kind of a weird voice. He used to wear glasses a lot, and after he became leader, his PR people were like, this look isn't working for you. You need to
You're a
start wearing
nerd.
contact lenses. Yeah, like they got him nicer t-shirts and nicer suits and stuff. Like it was a total makeover to try to make him like more appealing to Canadians. And they have been like, speaking of money and stuff, they have been running ads like nonstop for the past year, on news channels, on sports events, all that kind of stuff, to try to make him seem like this appealing person who you can trust. Whereas the Liberals have basically been running no advertising, like negatively against him, to try to define him in another way. And I think that has really helped. He also has this very he hasn't given much detail on his policies, and I think that works for him. And he has this very simple slogan, but you can see how it's appealing. It is axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. He repeats that all the time. Um, that's what he says. Axe the tax is the carbon tax, of course. Build the homes is the assumption is that homes are so expensive because there's not enough homes being built, which is partly true, but it's also like the financialization and the degree that speculators are in there. Fix the budget. The deficit is high, and he says he's going to balance it, even though he says he's also not going to cut all the programs, which he is, like, all that kind of stuff. And stop the crime. Of course, he claims there's this big crime wave in Canada, which I don't think is actually borne out by the facts, but it's very beneficial to say it. And then when you talk about the media side of things, the media narrative is very negative on Trudeau. And I would say it basically echoes a lot of the conservative talking points in the way that it frames a lot of the issues, and has been doing that for probably about 2 years now. So, it's very beneficial to the Conservative Party in that way. And the other thing is that the Conservatives basically do not engage with much of the media anymore. They very rarely send any like representatives or members of parliament to appear on CBC, which is the public broadcaster, but also a lot of other major you know cable media or whatever in Canada. They simply won't appear. They won't do interviews, and they instead prefer to do like local media, or they will do French media in Quebec because they're trying to grow their support in Quebec. But you basically won't see big English language interviews with anyone from the Conservative Party because they won't talk to the media. But even still, a lot of their narratives are reflected in the way that
Yeah,
the Canadian media reports on the issues, reports on Trudeau.
it's so
They have been
pathetic.
pushing, oh yeah, they have been pushing this notion that Trudeau should go, that Trudeau should be replaced for like almost a year now, even though it's very clear that like it's not going to happen. But they like it's one of those things that they just can't give up on because it helps fill the airtime and stuff.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating to watch, but also really troubling to think about the state of the media, right?
I just think that if someone was putting the boot into you, you wouldn't lick the boot, eh?
Yeah, and he even like comes out and like he will attack journalists if he doesn't like the questions, in the rare times that he will do like a media scrum. Um, he even attacked so CTV is like the biggest kind of television news channel,
Yeah.
and he came out and attacked them recently because he didn't like the way that they framed a certain clip of what he had said in Parliament around a budget or a non-confidence vote or something like that. Um, and yeah, he came out and basically said that the CEO of the company had directed them to do this like hit on him personally, totally, lacking in facts, not true at all. And then the company responded by firing two people who worked there and said that it was their fault, they edited it wrongly, like totally gave into it, right? And so even though he is like going on full attack with the media, they won't talk to a lot of the media. Um, they're still kind of caving to a lot of his narratives and, the ideas that he is trying to put out there and the way that he's framing issues.
We had a similar thing happen here with David Seymour, the leader of the Minority Act Party, was celebrating the closure of a media company and like media job losses. And
Right.
then one of the smaller fucking media outlets, the spin-off, wrote up a piece saying this guy might be the savior of media somehow. And you're like,
It's so wild. Oh my God.
I guess there's a type of class solidarity, maybe.
Yeah. And he also talks about like gutting support for the media, cutting the budget of the CBC because, of course, they hate
Yeah.
the public
Same
broadcaster and the
diff here.
Conservative Party. Yeah. And it's like they'll still totally give in to like whatever he says. It's so wild.
It doesn't work,
Very,
folks.
very similar to what happened in the ABC in Sydney, I think, from the sounds of it. They have caved to a bunch of those type of
And
things
BBC.
as well, and they had their board stacked with
Yeah.
an Australia Liberal Party type people, and
Yeah.
just shifting that sort of oversight and governance towards the right quite deliberately.
Yeah, it's
It's so shocking to see that. Like you saw that with, as you were saying, Kyle, like you saw that with the BBC as well, right? Where the Conservatives, appointed a bunch of these people to the BBC to change how it worked. And in CBC, under the last Conservative government, like they did something similar. They didn't cut the budget, but like they froze it at the level where they came in and said like didn't increase it after. So the Liberals like did a big boost in CBC funding after they came to power. But yeah, the Conservatives this time are like, we're killing the CBC. Like,
and
it
then
is
you're
gone.
like,
Yeah.
oh, they did a boost in funding. That's a bribe,
Right. Well,
Like,
I don't know how familiar you are with how things are working up here, but like during the pandemic, there was a subsidy that was given to
Yep.
a lot of
Same
media
here.
because there was a lot of, potential layoffs that would happen if they didn't. And there's also this new kind of initiative that they brought in where Google is going to be paying, I think it's like $100 million to media organizations, in exchange for linking to media on its search engine and stuff. And of course, the Conservatives all say that that's like Trudeau bucks going to the media to buy them off. And a lot of these right-wing people like totally buy into it because it appeals to like what they want to
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
When actually, when you look at the media, like it's using all these conservative and right-wing framings of like every single issue that we're dealing with, and it drives me mad.
Yeah.
Trudeau should go kind of rhymes, so it must be true, right? If you
Yeah,
follow
right,
that
yeah.
logic.
But like you see very frequently like people with like big pickup trucks with like fuck Trudeau signs on the back of it. And very frequently at like right-wing rallies, you'll see people waving big fuck Trudeau flags. Like it's a very much part of like the right-wing culture now to be like, vehemently angry at Trudeau personally.
Or
And that's why some people say like, oh, if they just ditch him, like the Liberals would be fine.
Right.
But the Liberals don't have like a clear successor to Trudeau, for better or worse. And everyone who is waiting in the wings, Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister,
Horrible.
Mark Carney, the previous head of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, Christy Clark, who is a right-wing former premier of British Columbia. Like these are all very people who want to pull the party like really far to the right. And it's not even clear that people would support them and find them
No.
appealing. Like when they do the polls, it's like people either don't know who they are or don't really care for them. But in the Ottawa bubble, people are like, oh, it must be better, right? Especially Mark Carney. They've been obsessed with Mark Carney, the previous governor of the bank, for like 2 years now. And every single time there's an opportunity, they're talking about how he's going to be the next Liberal leader. And like it's just it's so wild. Yeah.
It's so frothing, eh? It's
Oh yeah, yeah.
because this is exactly what you see. It's what happened in UK Labour as well, right? Except Starmer just lied through his teeth for a year, and then just went hard right on a lot of this stuff. And some of the clues were there based on his previous work, but yeah, it feels like there is definitely a subset within Western centre-left parties of people who are not there to do centre-left politics for some reason.
Totally. And it's not like Trudeau is some Jeremy Corbyn or something,
No,
like,
no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. And I want everyone to understand that that's not the comparison I was making.
Yeah. He's like an Ardern kind of figure, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When Ardern came to power, it was at least a lot of the coverage in North America was like, she's very much a Trudeau kind of figure, like a, more kind of progressive liberal sort of type. And then I think through both of their tenures, you saw kind of the issues and the problems with that way of doing politics and not embracing,
Mhm.
much more vigorously embracing a much more left-wing politics. Of course, she bowed out of politics much earlier than Trudeau. I believe they met up recently. Where was that? I saw a picture of them together somewhere recently. It must have been in New York or something, maybe at the UN General Assembly or something like that. But yeah, like, I think that's a good comparison for him. And,
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe you'd see like a liberal pull more to like a kind of chippy labor, but even that might be optimistic if you're looking at where some of these people would want to take it. Yeah.
The other thing that I guess we've just seen across the West as well is this, as you're saying, very vehement a hate of whatever left politician is leading the center left cohort. Just an increasingly violent, increasingly unhinged form of political communication. Now, Ardern said it wasn't anything to do with her decision to stand down. She just didn't have anything left in the tank, I think were her words. But, like people were sending her death threats like constantly, like this has become a normal part of right-wing politics in particular. We didn't like Ardern either on the left, but we're just like, yeah, please just leave. You
Exactly.
know?
Yeah. You don't need to die. Just
Yeah,
leave.
yeah.
Like, yeah, yeah.
Or change your policies. That would be cool too.
Yeah, that would be
Uh,
great. Yeah.
but
Trudeau has
the
talked a lot about that as well, especially recently. I don't know if you guys saw the story, but he got divorced from his wife earlier this
uh-huh.
year. And, the media didn't actually report very much on that or the aftermath of it, just to kind of say, like, this has happened. They put out the statement. Like, I would say the media was quite respectful about it, and I think
Mhm.
rightfully so. And I don't think a lot of people generally like have an issue with something like that. Like, divorce is so common in societies these days. For the prime minister to do it, it was like, okay, whatever. But yeah, he's definitely talked about how people coming after him, and in particular like his kids,
Yeah.
is something that has really affected like his family, certainly. And a lot of politicians, particularly women politicians, with the liberals and new democratic parties, have certainly talked a lot about it too here, which, I don't know. I don't really understand that. Like, certainly you can criticize people, and like on the left, we criticize people a lot, even ourselves, even our potential allies a lot. But yeah, there does seem to be something about like the tone of how some of these discussions happen that I don't completely, agree with and think is like productive for having like a positive politics that can actually deliver for people, and to try to get the people who would want to do that like into politics.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the
Yeah.
purpose to an
Yeah,
extent, right?
exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
but it's a normalization of that, we talk about these people being far right or like extremists, but by and large, the electoral right-wing parties who are pitching themselves as kind of more above board embrace these cultures, even if they're not doing it openly. You know, they are bringing those narratives into their cohort, and they will branch off from them with like much less extreme PR. Oh no, 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 that's like, oh, we no one should send abuse to women or whatever. But I do think there's some fair criticisms, and do this kind of plausible deniability thing. And every so often you'll have someone go, you'll find out, yeah, this dirty politics guy yeah, he was actually working in the office of the prime minister during this period, right? Like, oh, but we got rid of him because we found out. Yeah, I mean, you got found out, and yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the answer to that is, unfortunately.
No, and like in Canada, like Polyev, the conservative leader right now, he visited the trucker convoy when it was happening in Ottawa, and kind of said positive things about them. you know, even though there were like Nazi flags being waved around and stuff like that at these sorts of events, he has stopped to like meet, you know, what are framed as like carbon tax protesters in different places, but actually contain like supporters of Diagolon, which is like a far right movement here in
Yeah.
Canada. Like there's been a lot of this kind of, you know, in public, and when the media talks to him, he would be like, "This is ridiculous. Why are you suggesting I support far right groups and all this kind of stuff?" But
Because you're
then he
there
will
talking to
like,
them, mate.
yeah, he will like meet and talk to these sort of people, and it's very clear that like they're trying to bring these people into the fold, even
Yeah,
if they
yeah.
can't like, you know, officially like stand on a stage with them or whatever.
I mean,
Yeah,
those groups are looking at your Poilievres or your David Seymours here in New Zealand, and they're saying that's my guy. They like
yeah,
they know what the message is. We had this absolutely absurd incident this week. We've got a gang patch ban coming in. I don't know if you've got
yeah.
similar. Yeah.
No, we don't have that, but
Right, but
I'm
you know what we're talking
familiar with
about
it. Yeah.
because people seeing gang symbols in public is very intimidating. One of the reporters, good on them, decided to put oh, how about swastikas then? Should those be banned as well? And because Seymour has tied himself into knots previously, trying to do plausible deniability for far right hate speech, and how all free speech should be allowed because sunlight is the best disinfectant or whatever other fucking thing they want to try out. On camera, he ended up saying, "No, I don't want to ban swastikas," in a direct comparison with gang patches because he didn't think they were as intimidating somehow.
So wild.
The backstory
But
to
it's like,
that is the Candace Owens is visiting and her visa got blocked in Australia. And so
oh my God,
the
no way.
question sort of in the background was, will New Zealand block her visa? And so you know the Nazi thing kind of came up in that context.
But just
Fascinating.
completely wild. And the kind of thing that should sink a person's career. Like,
Yeah.
you should not. He's going to be deputy prime minister next year, right? Like,
Well, Polyev was tweeting like earlier this year about how the Nazis were actually socialists,
oh
because it's the
God,
National Socialist
we've had
Party.
the same narrative from the right here.
Yeah,
Like,
but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
this is the leader of the Conservative
yeah,
Party
yeah,
who's
yeah,
probably going to be the prime minister in like 6 months.
yeah,
You know, like it's just wild.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's quickly segue. We mentioned a couple of times throughout that the way that some of the big tech companies are starting to get a bit upset as well, and I think it's a subset of corporates who have become increasingly radicalized just an incredible rate, alongside um, throwing some of that money around to try and push policy a lot more fervently, but aren't getting covered to the same extent as, say, big oil or the other classic enemies. We've got cigarette companies here at the moment are kind of coming up quite a bit as being, and agriculture, I guess, another one of them. But these tech companies are often being pitched as, saviors of humanity. I mean, you have a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us. You've just released the final part of a little documentary series called Data Vampires. Um, how
I
you
wonder what my views are on these topics, right?
Yeah, I
Based on
like
those titles.
we're not trying to balance this because
Yeah.
there's a bleak reality that I think needs to be reported as much as anything else. But how are you seeing that playing out on the political stage in Canada? And what do you think we can even start to do about it, given one, this kind of positive pattern that tech companies have, two, the just outrageous amount of monies they have, and three, the fact that no one understands what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's the difficulty, right? I think it's been interesting to see that Trudeau has kind of like straddled this change in how we all see the tech companies. So when he came to power in his first couple of years, he wanted to be close to the Googles and the Facebooks and those sorts of companies. You might remember that there was a proposal for a big smart city to be built by Google, a Google affiliate in Toronto. That he was on stage with Eric Schmidt, and they were announcing it together, and he was so excited. That project, of course, got canceled within a few years because of a lot of local opposition. But by the time that happened, we had what a lot of people term the techlash, starting in around 2018, where, you know, sentiments on a lot of these tech companies really started to change as there was much more visibility on and reporting on, you know, the harms of the business models that a lot of these companies do. And so what we see in Canada right now is, you know, I think what you probably see in New Zealand too is this really kind of difficult attempt to square the fact that there is a recognition that these companies are causing a number of harms to our societies, but at the same time, they're very commercially valuable. They make a lot of money, and we want to see some of that investment happen here as well. And so, you know, on the one hand, you have in Canada these regulations that are coming out that are targeting, say, the streaming companies to make sure that they're contributing to the creation of Canadian content and that they're showing a certain amount of Canadian content, like on the home screens of the streaming platforms, instead of just showing, you know, a bunch of American stuff. And of course, you know, the streaming companies have been very angry about that, and their lobbyists have been trying to, you know, use kind of local experts to make arguments that are against these sorts of things, but make them seem reasonable instead of just things that are ridiculous because they're supporting these companies. Like this whole bill was framed around streaming companies, but the argument that the lobbyists use and that these experts domestically in Canada use was that actually the government is coming for every content creator on TikTok and YouTube and regulating their content, which was never part of the bill, never part of the plan. The government explicitly came out and said that's not what we're doing, but this was the argument that they used because they knew it was going to be much more appealing than saying, oh, they're trying to make Netflix show you a bit more Canadian stuff, and then you can still choose not to watch it if you don't want to, right? Like, you know, this is the kind of stuff that's going on. But then, of course, there's the news bargaining code or whatever it's called, which is similar to what Australia did a few years ago to try to get Meta and Google to pay some money to Canadian journalism. You might have heard that Meta just completely blocked news links on its platform. So if you try to access news through, or if you even try to post a link to a news article on Facebook or Instagram in Canada, you won't be allowed to do it. Whereas Google has, you know, made an agreement to do that. You know, there are a number of other bills like that that are either being implemented or that are slowly working their way through Parliament, as well as what's called a digital services tax. So you might be aware that internationally there was an ongoing negotiation to put a minimum tax on multinational corporations that particularly targets major tech companies. But the United States has been stalling those negotiations, and I believe it's the WTO, for a number of years. And so a lot of countries are slowly moving forward with their own domestic taxes. A lot of European countries have already implemented them, and global South countries as well. But Canada is finally doing so after delaying it for 2 or 3 years because the US kept saying, we're going to approve this thing soon. And Canada said, okay, we'll wait. And of course, when they announced that the tax was definitely going to start this year, even like the US ambassador and stuff were like speaking out and saying this, we might bring an international challenge against this, all like it's ridiculous kind of stuff, right? But so there's that angle to things. And then there's also the angle where they're trying to attract AI investment, and they're trying to put a, you know, get new data center construction happening with, you know, I think they gave $2 billion to like AI research this year, and they put in a new tax credit for data centers. And so they're trying to like do all this stuff to still attract like, you know, tech capital and get the tech companies to expand their offices here and all that kind of stuff. But what, you know, while doing this stuff where they're trying to address the harms that comes with these tech companies too. And I think they're trying to walk a fine line and not doing it great, but at least they're trying to do something. I wish they were doing a lot more to try to rein them in, right? But yeah, I think that's what we're seeing here.
Mark, you've been following some of the stuff happening in New Zealand as well. We don't really have as much policy intervention though, do we?
We're in a very different situation to Canada, which I think has a lot to do with North America and infrastructure. You know, we're a long way away. We're wired up to the world with these undersea cables. Building data centers here is a very different value proposition to, say, building something around the Great Lakes, sort of Ontario region, in terms of population and scale. And I think that's been probably part of the challenge. Because there's been some, the same talk has happened here. The AI stuff has probably moved a bit differently as well, because sort of building on that kind of that positioning, where the government here is moving towards framing New Zealand as being a consumer of technology rather than a creator of technology. So despite all of the rhetoric, they're continuously making decisions to outsource and subjugate sort of like economic sectors to these big tech. There's that like an all of government contract, AWS, sort of where a lot of stuff is kind of pre-signed, so they don't have to go through the full procurement process. I'm not really involved in that, so I can't speak to all the sort of detail. I don't work in that area. But I think it was very interesting when AWS announced that they were going to build this data center in Auckland, and everyone was kind of going, yay, now we can have data sovereignty because we're not going to send these packets of information over to Sydney anymore. Even though they're still within the same networks of the same multinational company, we'll just kind of ignore that side of things. But I think there was a thought that, there might be cheaper hosting as well. There might be opportunities to kind of do all this stuff in the cloud, but we're just not at a scale where that stuff really matters a whole lot. Technology now is, we can run massive scale web services fairly cheaply, and it's fairly straightforward. And there's a lot of open source and free technology that allows people to do that stuff now. So it's just, there's not a lot there. But having said that, the New Zealand government does have a huge amount of digital systems. So the contracts are worth, a lot. So there is certainly substantial interest from the two main players being Amazon and Microsoft, of course. So they want that government money, so they're here. But we were just looking into this before we started the cast, actually, looking at this backstory to this data center in Auckland, because Microsoft are here in the cloud, but AWS, I actually did figure it out. I went through the newsroom article, so I've got a theory on what happened now. So we know that they
I
were,
want to hear this theory. Yeah.
They were going in at all guns blazing in 2022, and 2023 they put in a resource consent, but the area that they were developing was in West Auckland, quite remote, and it was in a wetland, and so they were having to drain the wetland, so that was a big part of it. But basically, there was a cyclone that came through early in that year. It caused a lot of devastation, and I think it really changed a lot of risk estimations. There was an Amazon data center in northwest Sydney that got flooded out in 2015 or 2016, quite a ridiculous way. And in fact, a whole bunch of New Zealand organizations lost their web access during this Sydney outage. So it's very much front of mind for the technical people who are actually building these systems. And I think what it turned out, and this is also I think where my theory comes in. There's a bit of a backstory to so draining the swamp, so to speak. A lot of that is around stormwater management. I think, Kyle, you might start to see where this is going. We didn't mention it, but one of the big things that was kind of part of this right-wing shift in New Zealand politics was around water, and specifically like stormwater management and the massive infrastructure costs that cities keeping their rates very, very low have basically deferred constructing and investing in. Suddenly we're getting more rainfall, there's atmospheric river events. We're seeing sort of once in 100-year floods, and now like once every 2 years sort of events. And I think that what's happened is that they just realized that the actual infrastructure costs of building this data center were just not going to be worth it for them. That's my theory, that because that level of stormwater infrastructure would need to have been private. Like it wouldn't have been, there wasn't any existing infrastructure. The council and the government were not equipped to fund it because of all the fuckery that was going on around stormwater funding at the time. And I think that they've just quietly skipped town.
Just don't build key infrastructure on a wetland, eh? Like, I think that's a good place to start.
Well, where else can you build it? On a volcano?
Look, I guess it is. Yeah, that is where you live, right? But yes, build it on a volcano instead. Like, you're probably in a better spot. Probably.
I feel like there's also the aspect of it where, like, like when we're looking at Microsoft and Amazon, like I was speaking to Keone Mahalona, who's the CEO at Tahiku Media, and he really thinks that like not only is Microsoft trying to get these government contracts, but like, you know, they're trying to do like Maori language stuff in order to also say like, look, we have the local, you know,
Mhm.
servers here. We're doing like Maori translation. So you should be giving like your contracts for government stuff to us for Office and all these sorts of Outlook and all that kind of stuff, right? But I also feel like on the Amazon side of things, like, you know, obviously I don't need to tell you, there was this big effort to like get Amazon to be doing a lot more in New Zealand around like the filming of the Lord of the Rings series there. You know, when they brought the Amazon execs over to like wine and dine them and stuff, it was not just like, can we get this TV show, but also can we get you to start making all these other investments here?
Yeah.
And of course they took the TV show away, and it feels like there's probably this like more general withdrawal from like, okay, we don't need to be like doing this stuff there now, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is just a purely economic decision for them. They don't
Yeah.
care about any of it. But you know, it just that raises the question for government and society, like why wine and dine them? You know, why go to that extent? Where if they're going to be just like kind of brutalist about the decisions, you know, maybe we can look at them in that direction as well. But that's not really a factor, because I think it's always this kind of special pleading. You know, special pleading for tech investment. And there's not a very well established narrative that connects the actual kind of scale that we're operating at and the real demands and the kind of the cost benefits. Like we don't see accurate information around that. And I just think, you know, the government and the tech companies benefit from all of that sort of that fog of war, if you like, of the reality. But Amazon will know, because they have these data centers all around Asia Pacific. So they will know exactly what the costs are and what the benefits are for them, and the scale that the New Zealand government is operating at. They would have done their Oppo research on Microsoft in New Zealand. And I think, you know, Microsoft are basically the data monopoly here. They've I probably shouldn't go into details. This is one of the things, Kyle, when you always say your guests can say if they want to cut anything. I was about to tell an anecdote about a project I worked on in government where I directly saw how Microsoft actually lobbied and manipulated in a public-private way. So having kind of people on both sides and sort of installing these people in key positions on this
That's how they operate, right?
multi-year project to get it over the line. And then once the people in that private company sign with the government, they just fly off to the next thing. And it's just super transactional and obvious that they're doing it. But in that context, it's very, very difficult for the local industry or people who even have like an accurate understanding of like resources and how to plan infrastructure. Their voices just can't be heard in that kind of environment, because New Zealand is not like it's not a tech context, it's a sales context. We are sales and marketing for those companies. And our university computer science and AI sort of research is just not at that level where it kind of matters to them. So you know, if the government really wanted to do something, they would massively invest in science and technology and education and fund, you know, primary sort of focused research. But that's not where the conversation is going. The conversation at the moment is around, New Zealand is really, really bad at capitalizing on commercialization of science. So it's nothing to do with the sort of 30 years of austerity and slicing up the government-funded science into Crown research institutes and then making them compete against one another. This very pure neoliberal sort of model. We've got great evidence now of how neoliberalism has failed, you know, throughout that whole research and innovation sector. But I think it seems like people are a bit lost, because as we've been having these discussions about where to go next, this whole AI thing has kind of come in. And again, New Zealand is positioning itself as a consumer, as a sort of like first to market kind of customer of these products, rather than trying to actually innovate or change, thinking around what could be possible there, and adapt things for our local context. We don't seem to have the capacity or interest to be able to do that. So I don't know if you saw this, Paris, but the Callaghan, who are the government-funded research and innovation organization, has partnered with the government to release GovGPT. So the GovGPT, yeah, I'm not joking, that's what it's called. It came out a few weeks ago, and it was interesting because when they announced that they were doing it, there was all this kind of fanfare and like announcement as achievement style politics, but they released it very quietly, sort of moderate kind of soft launch, and people got in there straight away and started smashing it, and they got rate limited, and the whole service went down, and it just was just completely inane and pointless.
Any stories of like wild things that it started telling people?
Well, I thought that might happen, but I think it's just because they got rate limited and people were trying to hack it, and they just couldn't do anything because it was all the API requests were being blocked, so it was just like service unavailable, which I think was just an absolute fantastic kind of symbolism around the entire thing. Was that we didn't even get to the starting line of having like some weird controversy about the advice it gives, because the thing wasn't even like sending responses back.
I love that, actually. Yeah, it didn't even have to tell you to put like rocks on your pizza or whatever. It couldn't even get to that point. Yeah.
I mean, you don't need someone to tell you that wonderful piece of advice. You can
It's
just do
so
that
obvious,
yourself.
right?
Yeah.
But they actually Google started rolling out the AI overviews in the search in Canada like 2 days ago, and I'm losing my mind. I already use DuckDuckGo for some things, but I think this is going to be like the moment that finally gets me to like get rid of Google and not
It's
use it for search.
extraordinary, because I think what people maybe don't know about what Google's doing is that so that's kind of like the user experience and the product design. Is what the public kind of experience, and it's big. People have gotten so used to using Google as that primary way of indexing the internet, but Google has gone all the way down the rabbit hole with code generation. So
Yeah.
Google as a company was very against that approach for many years. The software engineering culture was kind of Unix graybeards, and they hired all of these people who like made some of the infrastructure and programming languages that powered the internet, and the big hiring frenzy in the early 2000s. They were the place for the hardcore hackers. They announced recently that like a huge percentage, like 30 or 40%, they claimed, which seems outrageous to me, of their internal code was being generated by AI. Maybe even more than that. I can't remember the exact number, but they and when they say AI, whatever that means. And so
Yeah.
their engineers are supposedly reviewing this generated code now, and just are shipping like millions of lines of this stuff into production. And so it's kind of like it's happening at the kind of inputs and the outputs. I think and I guess like you're doing a lot of teaching, I've noticed a bit of a shift in students now, that there is a perception that these AI systems are like search. So you can just type something into ChatGPT and get a result, like a kind of text retrieval, traditional search result, because people have no perception of synthesis of content versus indexing content like library style. That knowledge has just disappeared from society. So I really do wonder, like, how is there like going to be a kind of narrow generational band where the people who understand the difference between, say, text indexing and library stuff, information stuff, and synthesized generated content will freak out and be horrified and will try to adapt and change their internet usage. But it's like is there a demographic kind of window on that, and that the sort of younger generation has no idea about any of that, and just whatever the algorithm spits out is whatever they get? And then on the other end of that kind of window, I guess, is the sort of Gen X and boomers who just we all know what they're doing on the internet, and it's not great.
It's one of those things where like the we don't talk about the ideology or the politics of tech very much, people don't think about, okay, so what are the outcomes of what they're doing going to be? It's like, no, the ideology is just slop now, and they're going to propagate slop. Everyone's like, that's it. Like, I don't know. After a certain tipping point, I don't think we're there yet. But as you've been saying, Mark, like new generations only interacting with the pap that it's like churning out. If that's all they've ever known, that does filter back into the way that we organize societies, via the way we organize information. And if the reality of information is post-truth, in the sense of, AI hallucination or whatever, throwing back via search, stuff that just is absolutely incorrect, which we've seen a multitude of examples of, consistently. I don't know how civilization as we know it survives.
Just that it's been claimed as the innovation, and I think it's
Yeah.
fascinating that because previously that was called spam, right?
Yeah.
There was a divide of content on the internet between genuine content and so-called spam. That was an internet word that sort of emerged to describe that. So I think it's intrinsic to the medium. It's always been there, and it probably always will be there. But what we're seeing is basically a breakdown in that kind of consensus of reality on the internet. And I find that incredibly disturbing, but I'm kind of grappling with like, what does it mean? Because I feel like, is this just like my specific experience, informing the way that I see that, and having used Google when it was really, really good, when it used graph theory, and it just indexed the internet based on link relationships. And that was incredible. And we could still have that, but the tech companies choose not to give us that technology. It's not for positive reasons, unfortunately.
No.
Yeah, it's so wild and frustrating, It's like I don't know, based on what you're saying, I'm thinking like it's the spamization of the internet, Like obviously there have been many terms used in the past little while. But it's so depressing, like just to see the evolution of this stuff, and it really does feel like, there was all this promise of like the internet when it was first launched and like what it was going to be and what all these technologies were going to mean for us, and like you really see how I don't know, in one sense you could see it as misguided, but also how like an opportunity was really like lost out on there because of this like mass commercialization and the direction that like had to push us in, because these companies were guided more than anything else on like profit and control over actual public benefit once the money came into it. And you even see that with like the beginning of Google, right? Like Sergey and Larry wrote a paper when they were making Google while they were PhD students at Stanford, basically saying that like we can't do a search engine like this with ad funding, or like with advertising funding, because it would compromise the search engine itself. And then they become a private company, they go public in the sense of like selling shares and stuff, and then it's like, of course the ads need to come in because we need to make money, this is the revenue driver. And then like it's corrupted from that point and just has been further corrupted as that has continued. I was wondering, I know we're running a bit long. Can I throw a point out though that I think would be like relevant and interesting to listeners in New Zealand?
Get in.
Because this is something that came to my attention recently. I don't know if people saw this story a few months ago, but I know there's a lot of discussion about AUKUS, right, in New Zealand, but also in
I was about
Canada.
to actually just raise this as myself, so
Okay,
I'm
cool.
glad you're
Yeah.
heading it.
So, obviously AUKUS is this alliance of the UK, Australia, and the US, mainly centered around nuclear submarines. And there's this debate as to whether other countries should now join this alliance in more of a technology sharing piece of it, and intelligence sharing piece of it, that is not so much around like New Zealand and Canada having nuclear submarines, but in potentially benefiting from other technologies and what have you, right? And of course those 5 countries are already part of the Five Eyes network. And so I don't know if you saw, but recently in Australia, they announced that they are building a new high security data center that they have contracted Amazon to build for them. And so, a lot of their kind of military and government data will now be stored once this is completed, in this data center that is being built by Amazon. And they say that this is like a necessary thing that they need. And so as these discussions around AUKUS and whether our countries should join it have been continuing, Canada is also making a lot of investments in upgrading its military hardware at the moment. So buying a lot of new planes, buying a lot of new ships and submarines and all this kind of stuff, right? Not nuclear submarines. Canada doesn't have nuclear weapons, or we do have nuclear power, the big plants, but we don't have, nuclear weapons or anything like that. But so as this discussion has been progressing, there was an interesting article in CBC recently that said that Canada is pondering a top secret data center of its own. And basically, the reason for that is that with a lot of this new military hardware and also the information sharing that is happening between the Five Eyes countries, increasingly there's a lot of data that comes from that military hardware, but also the intelligence sharing that is considered kind of too secret or too top secret to be shared if the country does not have one of these top secret data centers. And to get one of these top secret data centers, you need to contract a company like Amazon in order to build it. And so the argument is that Canada will not actually be able to take full advantage of the new military hardware that it is buying unless it also builds one of these top secret data centers so that it can properly share information with Australia, the United States, the UK, who already have these. In Australia, it's being built. And so this was something that I found really interesting naturally, because one, it shows how not only are we in these military alliances that are very dependent on the United States, but through that, we're not only kind of being expected and forced to buy US military hardware to make sure that we can interoperate with the United States
The
military.
big word, interoperability.
Yeah, exactly.
Talk
Right.
about it for years.
Yeah, which is I don't know, maybe more of a concern in Canada than it is in New Zealand,
No,
particularly
it's
being
here.
able to work. Okay,
Yeah,
being
yeah.
able to work with the US military. So like, we're buying the F-35 fighter jets and all that kind of stuff, so it aligns with the United States instead of buying, other things from other countries that might be better. But we need to buy the US stuff, right? And so this felt to me like another example of how, we are kind of being forced into this US orbit, and even technologically, we are being forced to depend on the United States because Canada does have like high security data centers. It does have data centers that government data is stored in. That are not built by Amazon. But in order to like level up and reach this level of cooperation with, our kind of traditional Five Eyes allies, we need to now get Amazon to build us a data center so that it can reach the level that the United States is okay with, or whatever, to be engaged in this kind of partnership. And so like, I don't know what the total takeaways are, but it to me, it felt like very concerning to see how this is developing. I'm guessing that New Zealand doesn't have one of these data centers yet, but I'm assuming that there will be discussions around building one at some point soon. Obviously I'm against Canada joining AUKUS. I'm against Canada being in Five Eyes or any of this stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that on the table. So maybe if people haven't been paying attention to that aspect of this, that it's there. Yeah.
No, that's
Well,
really
it's
useful to
very,
keep in
very
mind.
relevant, I think.
Yeah.
And in
Yeah, I
fact, the
think so.
AWS discussions in the Auckland data center context were around Ministry of Justice and potentially other like high security records where there was much, and it wasn't really about the Pacific theater of operations and interoperability, but I think it's really interesting to look at that as a background context. It was very much about we need AWS's technology in order to make our high security government data center onshore, because we don't have the resources to do that, ourselves, which is disputed by some New Zealand companies who do it, but that's the narrative. I think it's really funny. Imagine these F-35 fighter planes have basically digital twins. So it's like you basically can't just run these massive resource intensive Lockheed Martin products now without also running a massive intensive, like resource intensive data center with
your planes need a data center now. Like, it's so ridiculous, right?
It's just an MLM, isn't it? It's just a multi-level marketing. Like, I don't know, they need some of this, they need some of this. Oh, you want to level up? Yeah.
And like all these US contractors, like they benefit from it, right? Like, we got to buy these planes from Lockheed Martin. We got to buy these data centers from Amazon. Like, I don't know, it drives me crazy. Yeah. Especially with these discussions recently around like, more generally around like the decline of US influence in the world, the growing kind of multipolar world that we're living in, and how it feels like, being a country that is within the US orbit, and certainly how Canada is so geographically close to the United States. We have the largest land border in the world. Obviously I know that New Zealand is very close to the United States as well, but I think the relationship between Canada and the United States is quite distinct, right? And it really feels that as the United States feels its power threatened, those of the our countries which are close within its orbit are actually being pushed to become much more close with it, to make sure that it's kind of shoring up its like closest allies, and that means that actually our kind of sovereignty and our ability to have like a sovereign foreign policy or a distinct foreign policy that reflects the values of our societies is actually being like reined in, because we need to be more in tow to the United States. And that's something that concerns me very greatly.
Yeah, I think it's perhaps also around the San Francisco and sort of wider economy. And Southern California was always the place where the military contractors were.
Totally.
And the tech libertarians and the Silicon Valley ideology people, the California ideology was always a little bit anti-war. And that you can see that had come from the
at least like post-Vietnam War it was, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that the Clue Train Manifesto and all that era of internet stuff was very much grounded in, we don't need that anymore, and we're kind of against that. And to see like Eric Schmidt is probably the best example of it, just the ramp up in like militarization and securitization of the investment portfolios of all of the sort of startup ecosystem there. It's just gone wild, and it's a feedback loop with these established oil companies and military contractors, and I think they've probably realized, with the end game of neoliberalism and the austerity, there's a limit to government spending that they can kind of leech off of, and the messing around with public health is one thing, but it's like maybe that's just where they see the profit center going.
Yeah, I always say I think that the tech industry's embrace of the military is on the one hand a recognition of the amount of money that the Pentagon has to give out, because its budget is basically like unlimited. But also because it saw the like antitrust threat and the threat of like break up big tech and stuff that was coming through in 2019, 2020, that kind of thing. And that was at the very same moment that the growing concerns about the kind of global influence of China were expanding. And I think the tech industry very much took advantage of that to say, you don't want to break us up because you need us to compete geopolitically. And plus there's all these, benefits that come of that as well, of getting all these military contracts and all this sort of stuff. A kind of anecdote I always like to give when we're having these discussions is that, obviously we associate Silicon Valley and the Bay Area with the tech industry, right? But Lockheed Martin is right there and was there before, any of these tech companies, at what we call tech companies today, were located there. And the very first silicon transistors that were being created in Silicon Valley were going into missiles that were being dropped on, the countries that the United States were at war with, right? So this relationship has always been there. It was just obscured for a long time and is much more coming to the fore.
I think that's really interesting, because I think there's a parallel to the development of neoliberalism. I think a very direct parallel, like the very first industries to deregulate in the US were the airlines. And what you saw with the airlines was after this period of economic chaos and mergers and acquisitions and small airlines going under, and everything that happened, the demise of Pan Am and all that stuff. And then they sort of reconsolidated around the original monopolies. And so I wonder if that is the same thing in a sort of macro scale, that Silicon Valley was about the military industrial complex. And it was just from that stuff I was talking about before, was this kind of the neoliberal period and the tech libertarian period, but the reconsolidation of those monopolies just don't go away. And so perhaps it's the antitrust question that's actually underlying a lot of the behavior, and perhaps that's what Canada and New Zealand really need to learn from the US, is around the kind of orientation that governments need to take towards these large, very powerful companies.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I think you're exactly right, with that reconsolidation. I was talking to Spencer Ackerman recently, who's done a lot of great work on like the war on terror and the use of technology there, and now like how Israel is using technology in its genocide in Gaza, and what it's doing in Lebanon and stuff. And he was saying that I think he was quoting somebody else actually. He was saying like you can kind of imagine a future where like Amazon buys one of these major defense contractors or something, and like these ties become much more explicit than they even are right now. And I think that that's kind of like, even if that acquisition doesn't happen, I think that we're already seeing the like scary impacts of what we call the tech industry getting much more explicitly involved in the military industrial complex and recognizing that it can profit immensely from that. And yeah, it's a scary, it's one of the many kind of scary directions that our like broader global society is heading in.
What a wonderful place to wrap it up.
Yeah, right.
Thanks so much for
Positive,
joining me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not grim at all.
Sunshine and rainbows here. Yeah.
We'll just do the little round off for our audience. Mark, where and if you want to be found, can people do that?
Well, my website is totally out of date. I feel like I should really put my so-called money where my attention these days, isn't it? Where my mouth is. But you can find me at metal.net, maetl.net. And I am going to do a whole bunch of stuff over summer to turn that into hopefully a resource that will inspire people to kind of look at the old school internet and kind of build on that. I think I'm going to go down that rabbit hole of just trying to make content on the internet at a level of quality to sort of encourage people to get into that. So yes, definitely find me. Search for that username and you'll get me on all the platforms.
Wonderful. And Paris, where can people find you?
Plenty of places. I've also been meaning to like redo my personal website for a while. It's like probably been on my to-do list for a year and still hasn't been done. But I host a podcast called Tech Won't Save Us. It's on any of the podcast platforms. I have a newsletter called Disconnect. That's at disconnect.blog. And if you're on Twitter or Mastodon or Threads or Blue Sky, I'm on all of them, and you can find me there pretty easily, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful. Hey, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another hiatus cast. We'll be back, I think, mid-November with more weekly current events stuff again. Lots of stuff happening in the space. Keep it posted. Like, subscribe, share, etc. And we'll see a couple more of these, I think, as we pull guests in to just have a chat about some specific issues. We'll catch you then.
If artificers are, then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paid with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they criticize a cost we ought to stay. Cause I live amongst the people every day. In this vindictive, forgetful fucking race.